Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next IMRSV podcast. I'm Genefer Baxter. This is Marco Locatelli.
Hey.
And I'm Zeke. Ezekiel Arany-Lucas.
Yes, Ezekiel Arany. Great that you said it and not me. I would have butchered it. So today we're going to be discussing the web as a medium. Zeke is a software developer of many years before the internet even came. Is
I
that
was
true?
I was not a software developer before the internet came. You could actually say I became a software developer because the internet was coming.
Oh, okay. I like
that's
that.
actually kind of where it came from for me.
Nice. So we're interested to start this conversation and then hear your take on things from your perspective and where the internet's going, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, well, where the internet's going.
Well, let's start the discussion, I guess, with how the web has been used previously in when you started playing around with it. What is the difference between how it is now and how it is when you first started?
Oh, let's see, how it is now versus how it is when I started.
Yeah.
So, I'll kind of go back to the origin for me because I think this is an interesting part.
Yeah,
so I moved to Seattle in 1991 and I had my first kid in 1991.
Aww.
And I barely knew how to take care of myself, much less take care of a family. So that was my original struggle, was just to figure out how to take care of myself. And in 1992, I found a job, which was my first kind of stable employment, working the night shift at a gas station, a Chevron station in Seattle.
A Chevron station.
A Chevron station in Seattle. I was working the graveyard shift.
Yes.
And I worked my way up to assistant manager in that Chevron station. Yeah, right? So that's what I'm saying, stable.
So you took it seriously.
I had a good manager. So
Yeah.
I worked with, because the people you work with determine a lot of times the quality of the work. And then I got promoted to manager. I got promoted to manager out in Redmond. And so I lived in Seattle, but I worked out in Redmond.
And
this
how far is that, like, distance-wise?
On a bus, which is all I had, it was about an hour and a half each way. Yeah, yeah, so brutal. And so Redmond is also where Microsoft is based. So it's actually about 17 miles, driving, if you drive there. So you can make it in 25 minutes on the freeway. At that point in time, traffic was not so terrible, and you have to cross
at that point in time.
Yeah, so Seattle is bounded by water. So there's water to the left, which is the Puget Sound, and water to the right, which is Lake Washington. Yeah. And Redmond and then across the water, there's Bellevue, and then through Bellevue is Redmond. So you kind of go through this, and the freeway, 520, goes from Seattle, basically where I lived in the center, straight to Redmond. Yeah. So on the freeway, you can pretty much get right to Microsoft direct.
And we're talking about Microsoft, like the main house.
Campus.
91.
Wow.
So this is 1990. I moved there. I moved to this campus. I moved to the gas station there in 1993. So it was 1992. I got there, and then I got an assistant manager, and then I became a manager in 1993. Yeah. And I was working out there in 1993. Basically, Microsoft people are driving up in their nice cars, and and it's one of the most profitable gas stations there. And I actually did a really good job running that gas station. Yeah. To be honest, it had a lot of problems before running the gas station. Yeah. I know. I felt fairly proud of myself.
Chevron is listening. We have a good ass manager.
But however, I also had funny hair. Right, so I had long black and red hair with my sides shaved up at that point.
More funny than it is now.
It was red here and then black down to here, and I would wind it all up and put it into a baseball cap so the customers couldn't see it. But still, they fucked with me all the time. Right, so it was a pretty miserable job. It's kind of working at a gas station, kind of miserable, but also because my boss at that point was not the other boss I had. It was she was just terrible. Anyway. And then one time I met this guy, and he was like the same age as me. Also, so I had no college degree. I was a high school dropout. So he had no, university education, and he was this 7 foot tall, 300 pound, big old spike through his nose, bald head, leather jacket, like this, really intense looking character. And I met him because I was friends with the original piercer in Seattle, basically. Yeah. This guy, and he was piercing this other bald guy's nipples. and he said, "Yeah, you can stay." So I was talking with him. He said, "Oh, you can stay." And we chatted, and it turns out he works at Microsoft.
And he was looking like,
and he's all like looking like this, and so I'm like, "Dude, that's cool." And I'm like, "I work out in Redmond too." And he's like, "Well, just stop by after work."
Nice.
right? So after my work at the gas station, I go over there to his office, which is building 17, which is where, right in the center of the Microsoft campus. And I was
it like a regular looking building? Because I'm imagining
it's a huge campus.
Like this.
It's a huge campus. So this is like, there's, at this point, I think there were something on the order of about 20 buildings that are all clustered pretty much together.
Wow.
Or somewhere around there. I don't know exactly in 1993 when I went there exactly exactly how many were people there. Anyway, I went in there and he takes me to his office, which he was sharing. He was working as a contractor, and he introduces me to his room. It's super casual. It's really chill. There's a little chair for me to sit down in, comfortable. It's much more comfortable than my space, right? And he's like, "Hey man, I gotta go to the bathroom. Do you want something to drink? We have free soda." And usually people are impressed by free soda, but what I was impressed by was his ability to go to the bathroom whenever you wanted, right?
That's so true.
Because every job I'd ever had, you always have to ask permission or schedule, or going to the bathroom, and it's like so dehumanizing to not be able to go to the bathroom when you want. And I'm like, I fucking want his job, right?
It's
like that
corporate culture.
And it turned out it's like 10 times. He also made like 10 times as much. And I wasn't making crappy money. I actually was working managing, right? Yeah. And I basically just stopped reading everything else that I was reading, which was reading the paper every day or 2 papers every day, and my fun books and stuff like that. And I just started reading about computers.
And then you're self-taught.
Yeah. So I went through about a textbook about every 2 weeks.
Wow. And where did you find these books? I guess you weren't Googling.
No, I couldn't Google them. Right? Exactly. Where do you find them? It turns out you just buy you just get oh, here's an MS-DOS manual. I would say 75% of the books that I read were useless. Freaking so terrible. Yeah. So terrible you have no idea, right? I'd ask for recommendations from this guy who worked in software. I would look around, but really 75% or more of what I read was literally useless.
So how were the people learning before for themselves? Were they going to school for this type of thing? Was there already some sort of college course that prepared you for working at a place like Microsoft?
There's definitely computer science.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure where the best people come from, but I think mostly they were also self-taught, and they had communities. So if you read about now where Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or these other people who were movers and shakers at the time, they're usually just kind of self-taught hacker types, but they always had other friends. They always had other people to learn from and to drive on. And this is what I kind of was missing. I think
a community.
Yeah, like a community. I really wished that I could figure that part out, and I was maybe not very good at joining communities. Anyway, but this guy who I'm talking about, quit Microsoft while I was there and started his own ISP.
What is an ISP for those of us who don't know?
Internet Service Provider. So this is in 1994, right? At the beginning of 1994.
That's when I was born.
Yeah, so he started the ISP, and nobody knew what an ISP was.
Yeah.
And nobody had internet connection. To do a dial-up at that point required you to know a lot about operating systems, about network stacks. Yeah. You had to have you had to understand how TCP/IP worked. You had to understand how just getting your modem set up would be an all-day affair, right? It really took forever there are those AT codes, and you go look through a manual, and you flip through, and you and you have to figure out who you're dialing into and determine exactly how you it required so much configuration. Only dedicated people did it, and this guy is one of those dedicated people.
Right.
And after he set up his shop, I went to his office, and I saw for the first time. I saw, and originally I thought I'd just become a network administrator or something. My original idea about getting a job was what
at Microsoft.
No, I wanted a job at Microsoft, but it was just I'll do whatever. So I started NetWare is where I kind of thought, because it was the most popular networking operating system.
Okay.
I don't even hear about it.
Yeah. I've never heard of NetWare.
I heard of it. Yeah. I heard the name.
Yeah. Well, I can go into full detail there too. But I thought that's where network administration would be something relatively easy to get.
Yeah.
Of course. Who wants to be a network administrator? It's the most tedious thing ever. But I went to his place, and he showed me his T1 connection, which was a one. What was it? I think he had a T1 256K line, right? And to his business. This is a business scale. This is like the fastest connection. Literally the fastest thing you could get to an office, right? Like he was paying fucking tons of money.
Yeah, it was super expensive back then.
Super expensive. Anyway, and he had a server. He had a Spark Station server thing. I mean, it looks like it's the size of a refrigerator.
Yeah.
It was this big thing, and on there he showed me. Oh yeah, and guess what? I have NCSA Mosaic 1.0, which was
1.0,
which was or even 0.9 or something. But it's like the Mosaic browser. There was the open source thing that that was the first web browser.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the SGML is actually the future at that point. HTML was just kind of a hack to get things up and running. And there's only like a few sites there, and basically the UI was similar to Gopher, except for you could use a mouse. So Gopher was before it was just menu-driven navigation, right? I don't know if you've ever seen Gopher, where you just go there and just go 1 through 9, and then you go like this, and it would go 1 through 9, and you click on there. So it's like a phone style UI, but through text mode, right?
Wow.
And so it was all gray with little blue hyperlinks, and just so simple. I mean, you can see it now. There's still flashbacks. Anyway, but when I saw it, I had even now it runs huge rush of tingles went up and down my spine, and I said, "This is what computers are for." Because I'm an information junkie, right? Like all I want to do is read and get stuff all the time.
And I think we all kind of are,
Well, now we all are. Now we all are, but back then I was a weirdo, right? Because I'm going and I'm like reading, a book or two, newspapers and then magazines. I'm like, consume, and I'm like, this is what computers are for, and I'm like, this is what I want.
Yeah.
And at that point, like I was still in my studying mode. Now I have a focus, and and I quit my job at the gas station. Had was unemployed for a little while, trying to figure out how to get a job. Did some interviews. My friend allowed me to put in the kind of a reference there, a fake reference.
Yeah, what did you have in your resume?
Fucking nothing, man. I had my job. And
books.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, even that I couldn't describe what it was. Basically, my resume consisted of I'm smart and I'm hungry, right? And
which works.
Which kind of worked. And it had a little note in there that I did something with networking with him because nobody even knows what the fuck that means.
Yeah.
Anyway, right? So I got an interview, totally flubbed it. Got another interview, totally flubbed it. I mean, all the interviews I had, they were all like,
management.
They're always
sales.
they're always like, do you have a car? Right? They're gonna hire you.
Can you come here?
Yeah, come to me. Or they're like, no, we're not interested. I mean, that's what the interview consisted of beforehand.
Crazy.
So when they start asking you real questions, I mean, I really was like, I'd either be talking super fast and being so excited about being asked questions, or I'd choke because I have no idea what.
Do you think there were a lot of people working in this field at the time? Were the company actually super hungry of people?
Did they need people, I guess?
So yes, the answer is absolutely. So when so I got a job in tech support at Microsoft eventually, which was like the low rung, but actually it was a great entry. And the even in tech support, they wanted really good people. I mean, they had to support people, and tech support is actually relatively hard to do at this point because there isn't Google, there isn't any other resources. People, I mean, the phone is the first recourse when the software doesn't work, and the software doesn't work a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
So you need the tech support.
You need tech support, and tech support is actually pretty hard to do. I mean, it turns out navigating people through this space is challenging.
Yeah.
So I mean, I did tech support. After a month, they doubled my responsibilities. Bumped my pay up.
Wow.
Literally, I got a month of training first of all, and the training was better than all of the books that I'd read on my own. So their internal training was awesome, right? So they really did the material exist.
It was like in-house.
Yeah, in-house. They had custom training materials, and they would give this to us. And out of the group, most of the people who did tech support wanted to play with icons, but then there was me, where I'm like, I will read all of your training materials and all of the training materials for all the other trainings you're going to do. And then so they doubled my phone lines and did all this, and they're like, you have great places to go. And I'm like, but I actually want to go work on something bigger than
So
answering the phones.
If you needed, like, so if you wanted to, it seemed like you could work your way up.
That's right. So internally, the resources were really huge if you wanted to. Now suddenly, I have a community.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I was talking
your
about.
Community that you wanted.
Right? Exactly.
Oh, so
Exactly. And this part was the resources internally were just like so far better than you can get externally. And they had an intranet. They have a database. They have queries. They have documentation. They have hyperlinking. They have networked help. They have everything like this. To support themselves, just to take care of their own business, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, but Hungary. So then I actually got a job on working on Internet Explorer 1.
Internet Explorer 1.
Which was part of the Plus pack for Windows 95. And this back in this day, so what Microsoft did is there was a small contingent of people who said the internet is the future and TCP/IP are the future, and another contingent of people that said netware is the future. So netware controlled 75% of the LAN software networking environment. So all corporations pretty much ran netware.
So it was just a bunch of corporations talking amongst each other using netware?
Mostly internal.
So
they had
an intranet before there was internet.
That's right, there was an intranet, many intranets. LAN parties were big back then, right?
Yeah.
So people would play Doom.
LAN parties.
Doom was huge in 1994. Doom was the freaking shiznit, and having LAN parties where everybody got their computer over to network it so you can play Doom together. That was amazing.
Bring back these LAN parties and have
they actually would drive their computer. You get the car, you drive all of your hardware over to somebody else's house, do all the wiring, set the router. It was a real work, and then you spend all weekend playing video. I never did this, of course. I just heard about people doing it.
That's awesome.
And the only people who really knew about the internet were people who got it in school. So the internet was popular with people who were straight out of school because they all had email addresses at school and university. They all
had probably some internet lines and
exactly.
They needed money probably because it wasn't cheap back then.
That's right.
In order to play around with this shit, you need a little bit of income.
Yeah. So the biggest difference when we talk about the internet then and the internet now is really access, right? It's like the ubiquity and the access. And the interesting thing is this particular juncture, right, was like when you talk about being at Microsoft. So I saw the opportunity, I wanted in, and I got in. I got in on as a tester, and I worked, just as a tester, and wrote my first little bits of code, to help test things and build things, and working as a lab manager. But there was actually a lot of, disagreement about what should go next, right? Infighting, and Windows 95. If the browser had not been in the Plus pack, Windows 95 most likely would not have included a TCP/IP stack. Because Windows 95 had not had TCP/IP built in, then it means that most people would have to go do something else to have connected to the internet. Right? At the time, everybody thought consumers would be using Prodigy and AOL and CompuServe, because they all had their own phone network. So you dial into AOL, and you'd only be in AOL. You dial into CompuServe or Prodigy, like this.
So it's still very separated.
Very separated. Yeah. And Microsoft actually, at this time, founded MSN and spent $100 million at the launch of Windows 95 to build their own X.25 network. This is all the phone router systems, so that you have these big phone banks that people could call into and then connect to MSN, because they were going to compete with Prodigy. Right? That was MSN 1.0. Nobody saw MSN 1.0. I mean, literally, it was like this. I mean, 2 years later, or a year and a half later, they bought UUNet for another $100 million, and UUNet was an ISP that was growing at the same time. So we see how we went away from the LAN focused networking and the dial-up, kind of bulletin board style communities to this.
I like that bulletin board style.
Well, the same word. You dial into BBSs, bulletin boards, were these things, text mode bulletin boards, were like all the original phone freakers and hackers that I've known. This is where their community was. Their community was on these BBSs, and you had a 300 baud modem, and you connected up to it and downloaded, your thing over a couple of hours, some data from about 2600 or whatever, and so this access, this point here, where even though IE 1.0 was not an important piece of software, the fact that it put a TCP/IP, and then the fact that that Microsoft invested in MSN means that they did something called the modem database. And the modem database, at the time, like every modem had to be configured separately.
Yeah.
The modem database was a giant INF file that had basically the connection strings for every known modem. Like it's a driver database for modems. So that when you plugged in your modem and you tried to dial out, so you just click on the internet and it would prompt you and say, what's the phone number for your thing? And it would like guide you just a little bit, and then everything worked magically. And this changed everything. So Windows 95 was a huge launch to begin with, but after Windows 95, it basically became trivial for somebody to connect to the internet, which is beforehand it absolutely required.
It needed some work.
It needed somebody who's technically savvy. Like somebody had to really solve that problem for you. So
this is where the internet began, really, as we know
the
it.
consumer internet began, and literally it was totally wacky because at this point in time, like I had my own domain because I was so excited about the internet.
You got your own domain. What was your first domain?
Ezekiel.com.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had that domain
that's
I don't know.
Right now.
Yeah, it was like for more than 10 years and got threatened with lawsuits and everything else. I never did anything with it.
Wait, why get threatened with lawsuits? Because did people want to buy it? Or
yeah, because they want to buy it. And
biblical
they say,
Ezekiel.
It's funny because they basically, when they say, can I have it? And I say, well, it's mine. And then, then they start threatening you. And I'm like, well, now that you've threatened me, I'm definitely not going to, I'm no longer going to talk to you anymore.
Wow.
Right? It was like, you can't just clobber me or something like that. Anyway.
Is it true that people were buying up like a bunch of different domain names just for this purpose?
Squatters.
Virtual squatters.
Yeah, name squatters. For a while, that was a huge business, as a matter of fact. But anyway, that's the biggest transformation. Like that's the 0 to 1.0 transformation.
Yeah.
And like a year later, you could see every company. If you wanted to be edgy, you put your domain address in it. So in 1995, there's suddenly this people. 1995, 1996. I used to make a joke about it. It's like, what? I mean, who do they think they are? VW.com. But 2 years later, if you didn't have a domain address for your company, then you were screwed. So that's the speed of trend. The transition was, nobody could see it coming. In 1995, like by the midpoint of 95, before we shipped Windows 95, it was an invisible horizon. There's just a few people who are like, it's the future, man, it's the future.
And they were like the hippies.
And like this. And it's like, you're just, that's just like a fucking thing for schools or whatever. And then 2 years later, if you're not connected to the internet, if you're not on the web,
it's game over.
It's game over. Like,
I want to fast forward that to now, because I feel a lot of what you've been saying has been super similar to now, like in terms of the culture and the community, and also kind of the informality of these software developers. You still have this demand. They still make a lot of money. It's almost the same, but what's different is that it's now more accessible. But I feel like the Instagram, so like the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., is almost like the new domain name. So you have people like who have these gold mines of social media handles. Now it's like a thing not to have a period or an underscore, just to have like a plain 5 letters, 3 letters, 2 letters if you're really cool for a social media handle. And people are doing the same. They're like purchasing these Instagram pages or buying them out who had these really good Instagram names. And now if your company doesn't have an Instagram name, it's like the same thing. You're irrelevant almost. Like,
I mean, this is super fascinating, right?
Yeah.
That we have these commoditization, like that we're like.
It's like almost an internet 2.0, like another level.
Or you could just say that, it's like the hipsterization of the internet, right? So like you always go where things are super cool, but not too cool, because Facebook is old school, right? So you gotta go to Instagram, but I mean, then Instagram will become dumb, and TikTok is actually where stuff is at, right? Like there's this kind of like,
It's TikTok.
Yeah, see? You don't know what TikTok is? You're like,
no.
Oh, see.
No idea what TikTok
Never.
Totally on the out, man.
Have
You ever seen Portlandia?
Portlandia, yes.
Yeah, there's the show. Shells are over, Plugs are over. It's over. And as soon as somebody else is doing it, then it's already over.
Yeah, I
Right?
feel like that sometimes.
It totally is chasing the tail.
But like go ahead.
Yeah, we live in such a like virtualized society. Like we have our virtual self and stuff like that. That probably the same way that we think of mind space now as we think of how we used to dress up in the 70s. It's probably kind of the same. There's gonna be trends every time that go exactly like you change your. In the 80s, you have a aesthetic in your mind, and then it's gonna be.
It's gonna be an internet.
Your
aesthetic.
virtual aesthetic. What is it? Like what was it? And it's gonna be. It was Mindspace.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Do you know Dr. Seuss, the Star-Bellied Sneetches?
No.
Yeah,
I know Dr. Seuss, but not that one.
Yeah, so read that one. That one's exactly this phenomenon. Like what I find almost the most fascinating about all the transformations that I'll say that I've been a part of, right? Like I was right there when people are making decisions, and I was like putting my little 2 cents, or my very selfish 2 cents in, right? Like about what we should work on next, or what's important, and the more interesting thing to me is no matter how many things we change, how we just stay basically like people. We behave, like this. So the
same patterns.
Exactly. So the internet makes everything faster. So what used to be, take a really long time to find, like communities, to build a community of similar-minded people, now it can be done just overnight. You can say, I have this interest. I look for other people with this interest. I create a group. I reach out to them, and
look at the Women's March, for example. Like that was all organized online.
Exactly, and that sort of thing. Before the internet would just take a long time. It just takes a long time.
I think it's such a big deal, the internet, because if you think of the way that we communicate, we've been communicating before without words, maybe grunts, whatever the fuck it was.
Grunts?
or like just movements, just stuff. Then we kind of conceptualized the idea of language into talking. So you can just talk with people that are in the same room or whatever. Yeah. Then you can write, for example. So you talk with people in the past.
Or in the future.
Or whatever. You're talking with someone in the future, and you actually exchange knowledge that way. Now you have this thing which is same on this idea of communication, but it's completely taking away space and time.
It's
you
levels.
Can talk with someone in Japan at the speed of light.
In the past, present, and future.
And it's literally it stays in a database. It becomes like this kind of conceptualization of communication as well. It's super interesting. It's definitely a huge milestone, and it's very interesting to know that like big companies, when you were there in Microsoft, big companies were actually spending so much time to create the internet. Right?
Yeah. I mean,
they were making MS. Like they were buying these big companies and stuff like that just to create a network.
They were doing all the hard labor of it.
They really. I mean, you're absolutely right. Are you familiar with the origin of the word meme?
No. That'd be a fun fact to know.
Fun fact.
Yeah. So meme.
Fun fact, guys.
Well, I mean, I will have to look it up and see what it was. But it was coined as a reference to genes, as opposed genes are
as in genes?
No, genes is on our genetic makeup. Okay. So our genes are the biological, physical way that we communicate, our success. We communicate information between generations, right? So our genes communicate, for us. There's a formula, and most other life forms use natural selection at the biological level to determine what the future direction and how they grow. And gene selection is very slow. Yeah, it's just very slow. But most organisms still have genetic drift, meaning that they genetically are kind of evolving very slow over these time frames. You can kind of see what like that. It turns out that like human beings kind of stopped having genetic drift a while back, and we kind of stabilized into like that. When we stabilized at the point where information became the primary selection medium. So we use memes instead of genes to determine how successful things are, right?
Yeah.
So we,
or how unsuccessful.
Or how unsuccessful.
A certain social structure, for example, or this type of stuff that memes.
That's right. So social structures are memes, right? Like we don't know. We started communicating through information in this, not in a physical space, but in a mental space, in a virtual space originally, and those things were much faster and much stickier, much stronger.
Yeah.
So it turns out our memes, like we could go through, it's kind of like how fast can you go through generations, right? And the memes can go through generations much, much faster. So you can get to the best one much quicker, like the most effective one much quicker.
To translate what is acceptable, what is a social norm in that moment in time, you're saying?
I'm saying that all things, whether it's a recipe, that's a meme, right? So the best recipes, are very time and space sensitive, right? Like, you have to have the ingredients that you want or whatever, but like it turns out that, genetically transferring this information would be like you have to let the people die off who got poisoned from the thing, and eventually the people who try the wrong foods will all just not do it, and so you end up like, I'm afraid of poisonberry, red things are bad, you don't eat red berries anymore. But if you can just say, hey, these red berries are good and those red berries are bad, and you do this by information transferal, well, that's far more efficient, right? You don't have to wait for the genetics to catch up with you.
But memes are super interesting in that they're very, they're not so descriptive, and they're very like, if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't know. There's maybe a little bit of text, has something to do with culture that usually just happened.
Well, this is what we call memes now. That's what I was saying. So meme, the term,
okay, so you're
was
talking
coined,
about another sort of meme.
The meme was coined much earlier than this, like in the 50s or I think the 40s.
Yeah.
And it was as opposed to genes. So this is why I say, like, we use meme now to say, oh, it's this little bit of information that we transfer around that way. But really meme was it's the selectable units of information, right? So this kind of concept is like
so this is the true definition of what a meme is before the memes that we know today.
So we got nicknamed these things, these little social media memes, we can just say are a type of meme. They're a piece of information, and actually they do. Some of them are selected and become successful and persistent and go everywhere, and other memes go nowhere, right? So it's a good example of that sort of behavior. But like I said, a recipe is also a meme, or just even a word, that we use this term.
For the kids out there, this is where meme comes from.
Memes, look them up. No, I mean, just, the notion you were saying there before, communication and stuff like that. But when we speed up these cycles, then the best ideas and the worst ideas are also accelerated, right? Yeah. We can bounce them around, where if you have to use letters for two mathematicians to work on a formula, it can take decades or centuries to get to a point where you've solved a really hard problem like Fermat's theorem. But when you can network 1,000 of the greatest minds of the planet together, like every little piece forward is a piece forward for everybody instantaneously, right? Yeah,
and you don't have to wait for the biological
counterpart
of it.
Or like I said, the letter or the physical thing. I mean, we can transmit any kind of information that we want.
Such an interesting way to put it, like with this difference, this shift between the biological transfer of information and just completely abstract way of actually sharing information so much faster. It can literally be obtained in a lifetime, which is what we usually care for.
I mean, that's what books did as well. All of a sudden you can download hundreds and hundreds of years of information in like a couple hours of reading a book. But now the internet is like, in a YouTube video I can download millions of years of knowledge in 10 minutes. So kind of going back to what this conversation is originally about, which is, no, it is perfect, using the web as a medium. How do you feel that now this speeding up of communication and this sort of democratization of users, now everyone has access to the internet. So now everyone's here, it's accessible, it's fast, it's working nicely. What do you think is the next step of how we're going to use the internet?
I'm going to say regulation.
Yeah?
Yep. So
it's going to be regulated?
I think what hasn't happened is the norms haven't caught up, right? You know, and I'll use kind of a separate example. In the 70s in the United States, about 75% of people smoked. Right,
Yeah.
so of course smoking was legal basically everywhere, right? But when smoking became less popular over time because people recognized the health risks and became socially stigmatized. You fast forward to like 2000, so it's 25 years later, and sure, some restaurants don't allow smoking, but most have a smoking section still, and all bars have smoking.
Yeah.
But fewer than 20% of the population smokes. So what is that? Why is that? Well, it's just kind of habits or legacy or inertia of change. So you see all across the United States suddenly laws start to get passed.
But which came first? They stopped smoking because it was bad for them, and then regulations started, or was it the regulations which lowered the?
So the regulations typically follow the social trends. There are very few times where regulations are ahead of the game because bureaucracies are not naturally fast.
It's not as fast.
But it does catch up because what should have happened is that fewer than 20% of the places should allow smoking, right? Like you kind of conceptually you'd say, oh well, as the population doesn't smoke, then the places where smoking is allowed become smaller and smaller and smaller. But that didn't happen. So when that didn't happen, then the population says, well, now we passed laws, and now we're restricting where people can smoke because 80% of people don't smoke.
Anymore.
Right. Now, if 80% of people smoked and it was illegal everywhere, you'd probably see laws getting passed the other way around to make smoking more, liberal.
This is because the 80% who don't smoke don't want to be in the vicinity of the smoker. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's just going with the biggest population who's with that trend.
Yeah, and so I think what we're seeing with the internet, a lot of this, Google and Facebook and stuff kind of being held accountable, and what we've seen is the fastest, biggest wins type of thing. But this consolidation of power and the kind of eventual, I'm going to say, we need norms and mores about how to behave or how to interact on the internet, and we haven't really figured out how to make that work. And I think that as we're moving forward, some of these things will be formal regulation, other things will be more informal. But I think what we're really going to see is coming up fairly soon is, and it's unlikely that you're going to see someone just kind of like a company just come and destabilize and take away Facebook's people all of a sudden. A billion people aren't going to move all of a sudden. But definitely the people who are on Facebook might say, well, we don't like the way Facebook runs their business, and so we're going to institute laws which control Facebook's behavior. Facebook can't do this or can't do such and such. So it's the innovation, as the innovation slows and society kind of catches up a little bit. I'll give another example. This is a great example. Where did the Web 2.0 come from?
Where did
the Web 2.0 come from? So Douglas Crockford gives a really great speech about this. Douglas Crockford was one of the premier architects at Yahoo for web architects. So when software developers were not usually considered, web developers and software developers were not really on the same tier, but Douglas Crockford very early on understood to build large-scale applications requires real engineering, right? And on the front end, so JavaScript must be a real language. Read about him; he's super good speaker, really smart guy. Anyway, but he claimed that the turducken, this is JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, is terrible coordination of languages. Like it was a really bad kind of conceptual group, but it was the only game in town, and it still was good enough to solve all of the problems if you're careful, right? And if you're thoughtful. And he said, but we couldn't really see it until IE won the browser wars, and then Microsoft gave up development. So IE 6, which is right after Windows XP, had finally vanquished AOL. But Microsoft, for various reasons, was not super interested in driving forward browsers. So before that was competition. It was every browser manufacturer, Opera, and everybody else was always introducing new tags. Like every week, every month, there was a new tag, a new way to build the internet, and all that stuff. So as a web developer, you're like chasing the platform, and it's really different depending which browser you're on.
And the user interface is different every time, probably.
Well, the API, really the low-level APIs were different. But once there was just one, for a while there was just IE6, and that was like 80 to 90% of the browsing activity was on IE6. Yeah. And web developers can complain about it, but what they got to do was focus on it. So now they have stability.
Yeah, they can chill.
They can chill. And what they did is they developed really great frameworks. This is where like the best kind of the original web frameworks came from, because what they were trying to do was to make up for the lack of the right APIs or the right platform to work on.
Essentially,
and they build the toolkits. That's right. So they relaxed and focused, and they took the different things, so like Ajax, which was the XML, which was like the dynamic programming by setting up JSON and bringing it back. These were kind of accidents of features that were built on purpose.
Wow.
In other words, so how Ajax works was this XML HTTP, which is a behavior object that was attached to Microsoft's IE originally, because the MS-XML team had this vision of the future of XML replacing all other things. Really, their idea was that HTML is terrible, XML is the future. You don't remember this in the 90s or 2000s. There's this crazy stuff for XML. Anyway, XHTML. Anyway, they had this extension which was to make their programming thing, and IE had a way of extending the browser called behaviors, and so they put this behavior in there, which was XML HTTP request.
Oh, okay.
Now, it turns out that this little piece is the piece that made it possible for web pages to go back to the server and bring data back. Wow. Same way that IE put DHTML was a side effect of the fact that they had used Visual Basic Automation for the entire DOM, which made it possible to program the entire thing. So and then LiveScript became JavaScript, was introduced by Brendan Eichmann by Netscape as a hack to get around the fact that they didn't want to use Java because Java was piggy and slow, right? So to just change some little things, do simple animations in the browser. So these different pieces are kind of connect up. That when you have stability, then the web developers, the application developers, start poking around and seeing like, what? This is all I got.
Yeah.
What can I do with
what
this?
Can I actually
do with this? And they're like, oh well, XML HTTP request. XML is too slow. This parsing this thing is super slow. So what do we use? We use the JavaScript thing, and JavaScript had something called eval, which would just take any text string and then just use it to execute it. And this was handy because you put have a user type in and then the eval and you get REPLs and things like that. But with the part that Douglas Crockford worked on and Jason was saying was like you can just take the data side of JavaScript and just return that, and then you have a data object that gets trivially supernatural for me to say, give me this thing, give it as a string, then I do an eval on this string. Now I have a fully formed data object that I can do data binding or manipulation on type of thing. Really easy way to do it. Non-intentional. Nobody designed the system to do this, thinking that was going to use. They were all designed to solve other problems.
Right.
But the developers, once the stability was there, they've created the Web 2.0. So the platforms, the browsers, did not create Web 2.0. This was the Douglas Crockfords and other big name app developers.
It's actually a very interesting thing because it's like when all those developers and programmers and stuff like that were literally learning to write every single day because new tags will come in or like new stuff. Once you're like, okay, this is a pen, this is a paper, now you can write, and it's the JavaScript, or like these languages that now are used everywhere. Like, okay,
exactly.
It's like learning your ABCs and then
you can literally do anything on the browser. So,
but originally, people didn't think this way, right? Like they actually, you build a web page, and there's a joke that you had web monkeys. Like if you real software.
What's a web monkey?
A web monkey was just some college kid who could read HTML, and just hired him for $5 an hour to go build a web page.
Wow,
right?
$5 an hour.
Yeah, really.
You know how much people get paid for web pages these days?
I know. So it's real software development. Back then, software developers would not work on a web page. Like that was you're kind of
It was like
Like,
two
below
below.
you. Even now, even as very recently, web developers would be in a different class of developer.
Yeah.
You know, in the companies, they would be like, oh, and oftentimes it's like, oh, back end is where hard problems are solved, and front end is where, you know, like easy stuff. And I've never believed that. I mean, it's a completely different programming model. I call them, you have plumbers and painters.
Mm-hmm.
And painters like to be on the front end, where you can really see what you're working on, and plumbers like to be hidden and do their own work.
Right.
And those are two kinds of developers.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I'm kind of a
Still
hybrid.
today.
Yeah, still today. This is what I'm saying, but the domain specificity, you can't take a plumber and just say, hey, yeah, go work on the painting.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. I mean, like, you can't build web pages if you don't know how to build web pages.
Yeah. So say this leveling out is happening now, and regulations will begin to develop. But what do you think is that last push before all these regulations are coming? Web is still like pretty open. I mean, people can do some impressive things these days on the web that a lot of people can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So when these regulations are here and that kind of stops the freedom, perhaps net neutrality will change things a little bit if that goes through.
I don't know if I think that's a little too extreme. I don't think it'll stop freedom. I think that, you know, there's a lot of investment, like net neutrality is a really good example. You know, like the Wild West of the networking providers can do anything as long as you get a connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
think is not satisfying. You know, people would like to know what it is that they're paying for, what it is that they're going for, and they would like to have as a larger community, we would like to have a statement about how the internet is run separate from how the internet is made money. You know, like, and that's where the regulation comes in. It says, you know, who has access to our metadata, who can control the flow of information. I mean, so like my friend who's an ISP, you know, you find out it's quite interesting how networking, you know, how this information is. These meet me rooms that are in buildings, like in Seattle's case, it's in the Weston building. There's a couple of floors that have basically all the servers that are like, there's a nexus node. This is where you have to be if you want to talk to everybody else in Seattle, right? You know, like that's how it works. All the ISPs, and they have these agreements with other ISPs, these meet me rooms, you know, where they're like, hey, let's all agree that we're gonna put some money in here, we're gonna share so we can put our bandwidth so that we can all have like, and we compete someplace else. We don't compete by excluding you know, people from the connection. We all want a robust connection, you know, everything, and that's worked really well, you know, up until a point. But when it doesn't work, this is where regulation steps in. It's like, now these people are going to start saying that only Netflix goes at full speed, and everything else has to go at half speed. And then as a society, we have to say, is this acceptable or not? So I don't think it's about clamping down. I mean, this is possibly it is. You know, it could be like China, where free speech, you know, like where the society, don't make a mistake, it's not just the Communist Party, it's their society values this consistency, you know, this structure, right? And it's not like Chinese was like, let's get rid of the Communist Party. Like, that's not what's going on there.
I mean, that also, but I think when I say that, I'm thinking of people like Anonymous, for example, or these web crusaders who are out to just like WikiLeaks, things like this. So when there's more regulations, you perhaps lose these checks and balances that are there to expose people who are controlling the web. So before that happens, then what? You know, where do you?
Like I said, I feel like there's got to be it's a dynamic push and pull thing. But I mean, you brought up WikiLeaks, or you can, you know, Anonymous, or the NSA, you know, like that. Where are the boundaries? You know, what are the norms of behavior? You know, like our phones. Our phones are a great example, right? Like, how are they subject to search and seizure? You know, like, what's the level of exposure that you have? I mean, we carry so much more information on our phones than we ever carried in our wallet, right? So it's impossible for us to think rationally that they should be equivalent.
Yeah.
Right?
In our
But-
brain to be
But
Yeah.
exactly. It'd be
It's a
almost
second
the
brain.
same.
Same
It
as-
is. This is our
Yeah.
cyborg thing, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is our offline storage.
Mhm.
You know, and do they have equal right to our offline storage that they would have to our brains? And I think the answer is like, screw that.
Yeah.
And the laws have not caught up. And that's why I say regulation. So I don't mean regulation in the sense of like, oh, we're all going to be shut down.
Yeah.
I'm talking about where some things have to be formalized. We have to say, you know what? This makes sense to us.
Mhm.
And technology has just so far outstripped the pace of technology has so far outstripped the pace of bureaucracy that and there has to be a little bit of calm,
I think so, yeah.
right? In order to so I'm hoping that even just like 2 or 5 years or something like that where it's not like we're saying, oh, Facebook is really what we're talking about here, and Google is what we're really talking about here.
Mhm.
Not that they're going to be like completely swapped out for some other company or something.
Yeah.
Then we'll kind of be like, okay, now we're talking about regulating Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
Like, what is Zuckerberg allowed to do with our data?
Right.
Yeah,
You know?
that's interesting.
Right? What is Google? Is Google allowed? How closely should they work with the NSA and the CIA? Or how should Apple? Is Apple required to give data?
To give data,
Yeah.
or to
Or
open
not.
the iPhone.
Yeah,
What
it's-
sorts of, like, there's different sorts of data as well. I mean,
Yeah.
what we do with immersive arts is also do live generated data in an installation when they're interacting with things. So is this also going to become a private thing? Is how I touch something or how I walk or how I move also going to be considered private and something that no one wants to share? Like, am I able to collect your footsteps? So not just your passwords, your keys, your pins and stuff, but actually your biometric data is a big scare, I think, as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Fitbit used in law cases, right?
True.
I mean, like, the information is being collected because we want it to be collected for various reasons. It's what are we going to do with it, and what are our protections? I mean, it's just a completely different. I mean, it's the Wild West, really.
Literally the Wild
It
West.
is. It's a great time to be in, but it's also kind of scary. But it is the Wild West.
But eventually, the railroads catch up, and then the bureaucracy gets to the Wild West. Didn't stay the Wild West,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Actually, it becomes a city, like a state.
Exactly,
thing
and then-
where
Yeah. So
you can
I
actually
guess,
have rules, police.
I guess then, I think a good last question would be changing it a little after the dust settles and there are some regulations and the internet is this normal thing. Maybe the pace slows down a little. Then how do you see human society? This is a question for both of you guys. When the internet is normal, like calm, like regular everyday society, if everyday society is calm.
So I'd like to say Star Trek.
Nice.
That's my kind of ideal.
Yeah.
So
Like
we
kind
can
of society.
inching closer to Star Trek.
Yeah.
I mean, in the best case scenario, we have the ability to break down barriers, right? And I mean, obviously, people who are afraid of the barriers being broken down are this part of the internet or this part of modern society is the most terrifying, right? Like that. Like everything will fall apart if we don't actually have the order of things being like that. But I feel like, the progression of society says that our in-group becomes ever larger. It used to be, it was like 5 or 6 people a long time ago, and a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. And constantly people are thinking, maybe our in-group is too big, we should split it in half. Secede!
Yeah.
But I think that the momentum of the human organism is towards a
proper globalization, like proper.
We want to be able to communicate to everybody, right? We didn't say, hey, here's the ability to communicate with everyone. Let's stop doing that. We said, no, let's see if we can make it faster, more ubiquitous. That's our nature. We want to have one. So my hope is that we don't wipe ourselves out before we get to Star Trek level.
We'll be fully integrated, maybe. Maybe AI won't take over. Maybe it will.
Or maybe it's our friends. Maybe there's a different choice.
It becomes as much as fire cooks our food.
Yeah, or it's like right now we have a phone in our pocket. Maybe every person has an AI that grows with them.
Yeah, I mean,
we all use them anyway already, more than we think.
You know, fire is very dangerous, can burn down houses, but if you have it in your stove, it's very useful.
Yeah, that's the trend.
That's
the trend. I mean, I think Steven Pinker just published a book, but I mean, our brains are wired to identify the negative aspects of everything and record them for survival reasons. It just has much more significance. But objectively, you know, mortality is down, violence is down, like across the globe. You know, hunger is actually down. You know, literacy is up. You know, it's not solved. These aren't solved problems. But you know, even poverty, the worldwide poverty is like the level of what poverty even means has shifted. You know, what people have in poverty.
Right.
You know, it's this trajectory is very, very promising to me, and I think that the internet and communication is absolutely part of the solution. You know, like us understanding. I mean, we were talking about books before. I mean, books was one of the best ways to have empathy, right? If you could not go and meet these people, then read about them.
You read about their stories.
Then you have like this
their perspective.
Yeah, and the internet is that way too over time. And I think the next generation of people will have such a different way of perceiving things that I have a hard time grasping what it would mean for them, you know?
Yeah, just using technologies like virtual reality, you can literally get down on a new level of empathy.
Yeah,
literally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Zeke. It was nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And great episode. Bye, guys.